Faith again, and today I'm going over reliability for assessment. This is part of the process of selecting a instrument. This is one of the necessary components to selecting an instrument, right? And so reliability. So in short, vocabulary lesson, reliability refers to the consistency of the scores obtained by an instrument. So can I rely on these scores? So when we are looking at instruments, I want my instruments to be consistent. If I want to measure depression in people, I want to pick an instrument that accurately determines who has depression and who doesn't, and it does it again and again and again accurately. And there's different types of reliability. So again, this is going to be heavy on the vocabulary. We're out of the numbers part for right now. So the way I like to explain reliability and consistency is, imagine you're going out on a date, right? And you're going to go someplace nice, like a Chili's, right? And so you're going out on a date, you're busy, you've got school stuff, you've got work stuff, you've got family stuff, and so this is important. So you want to go to a place where you know what to expect. You know that you're going to have a good time. You definitely wouldn't go to a place where you know you're going to have a bad time, and you don't really want to risk going to a place where half the time it's good and half the time it's bad. So same principle. So imagine that you and your interest are going to go to either Chili's, Mama Margie's, a local jaunt, or Wingstop. And as you're trying to decide where to go, your partner points out every time you go to Chili's, your order is wrong half the time. So literally every other time you go, the order is completely botched up. All the other times it's great, right? So you're really kind of throwing the dice with this one. If you go, you might have a great time, or it might be the end of this new relationship. So you take Chili's off the list, and you'll see that I said Chili's here. You're not going to go to Chili's because it's not worth the gamble. It's not consistent. It's not even consistently bad, right? It's just inconsistent. Your partner points out that when you go to Mama Margie's, you always have a good time. Every time you've gone, you've got what you ordered. You've always had a good time. Good music, good food, good friends and fun, right? It's like going to a restaurant, right? You order the same thing because you expect the same thing. And then you think about Wingstop, and most of the time it's been good. There have been a few hiccups, right? The fries were under-seasoned. They went too heavy on the hot sauce a couple times, but overall it's been good, and so it's adequate, right? It has good enough reliability. Like if you couldn't go to Mama Margie's, you'd go to Wingstop. So you wanting to go to a place where you are confident in the result that you're going to get, and reliability is the same concept, right? We want to select instruments that consistently give accurate results, right? We don't want to pick an instrument that half the time it's wrong. It gives a false positive or a false negative, right? We want it to be accurate frequently. So how do we measure something like this, right? And so now let's go back to one of the earlier videos where we talked about latent constructs. You know, the stuff that we're trying to measure, we can't just look at. It's not like I ask you to eyeball the height of a refrigerator and you guess, and then I take out my measuring tape and I measure it and I can verify it, right? It's difficult to measure what can't be seen. So this is the concept of trying to measure the true score. I'm trying to measure your intelligence. I'm trying to measure your efficacy as a counselor. I'm trying to measure personality traits, but I can't just look at it and find it, right? So the true score is what it is absolutely. Like if I had the example I have here on the slide, if I had a crystal ball that could tell me instantly and precisely what is your IQ, that's your true score. However, no such crystal ball exists, or does it? So instead what we get is an observed score. And this is true of any test that you have taken. So those of you that grew up in Texas, when you were in high school, you probably had to take a Texas history class. And then if you went to college in Texas, you had to take a U.S. history and a Texas history. And so you take a test here, a midterm and a final or a paper, whatever it might be. And what that professor is trying to do is determine what is your knowledge of Texas history. However, that professor can't just divine the knowledge, so they give you an assignment. And what you produce, what you give in that assignment is the observed score. That's what the person has to work with. So with the midterm that I'm going to give, it is my attempt to measure your knowledge of assessment. Because I can't just peer into your mind and see what the answer is. What I will see are the results of your test, though, right? And so that is my observed score. And that's pretty much what I just said. So there's one other piece of this. So we went over true score, which is your true measure, your observed score, which is what I actually measured. And now there's error. Now error is something that gets in between the true score and the observed score, right? Error is static. Now this is a little confusing for some people because when I say error, it sounds like a mistake. And we're not talking about a mistake. We're talking about static. We're just talking about nothingness. It's just something that keeps us from measuring what we want to measure. So let's tie it all together. I want to know the truth about some aspect of you, some aspect of your personality. I want to know how much extroversion you have. I can't ever directly see that. So I'm going to try and measure it with a test. Error, or static, is going to keep me from getting to that true score. And what I wind up with is the observed score. So for you logic-minded folk, this is what it would look like. The observed score, your score on a test, is your actual knowledge, ability, trait, whatever, plus error. And it might be that you were distracted that day. It could be that it was really noisy outside and you couldn't focus. It could be a poorly worded test question. Error is like noise during a conversation. When there's little noise and there's not a lot of stuff going on around us, if I'm talking to you and you hear me clearly, there's no mistaking what I said. However, the louder it gets, someone keeps turning up the volume on the music, it gets harder and harder to hear each other. And so you're trying to piece together what I said, and sometimes you're able to, and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're able to go off of my body language or facial expression. You catch some words, and other times it's a complete swing and a miss, and you don't understand it, right? Another example, a real world one, would be when you drive from city to city. So my wife's family lives in the valley, and we'll drive down there, and if we're listening to the radio in San Antonio, as we start driving away, what happens? It starts getting staticky. And at first that static is very little. It doesn't interfere too much. We hear it, not a big deal. But then as we move further and further away, the static is increasing, which means what I'm hearing, the quality of it is decreasing until there's a point of now it's just static and we're not hearing any music, right? Same thing with a test that has a ton of error in it because the instructions are like really unclear, or the client is really distracted. right? Maybe they're like in a crisis situation and we're asking questions like, tell us about your family, and what's the square root of 9, right? Well, if you're in a crisis, like that's going to cause a problem, right? It's not going to be a true measure. So error comes in 2 flavors: systematic and random. So systematic error is the better of the 2, I guess you could say. This is stuff like there's a typo, I gave poor instructions, faulty grading. So the first time I put my midterm for this class on Blackboard, there was a question and the right answer was A. It was option A. However, I accidentally told Blackboard that D was the right answer. So everybody answered A, and everybody got it wrong. So that's an error, right? Because it keeps us from seeing like their true knowledge. There was this mistake. The reason I'm saying systematic is a little bit easier to contend with is because all I did was go back into Blackboard and fix it, and the mistake was corrected, right? So it's stuff that we can control for. I could tell you about an assignment, and then it's so messy, it's so convoluted that I just say, you know what, everybody gets a free pass. I can control for test questions that are really poor. I can just throw away. Other versions, it could be there's language translation issues, right? So we might work with a client whose native language is not English, and the test does not have a translation. So we can kind of control for that by maybe getting an interpreter and things like that, or a translator. Now, random error is the stuff that we're always dealing with. This is when, let's say you go to take your NCE, or in the past, if you've taken your SATs, ACT, GRE, whatever else there is, and you go to take the test, but you're feeling ill, right? Or you stayed up all night. You're in a bad mood. You're confused about what's going on. You're uncomfortable. Things like the room is very hot, right? Or very cold, and you're so uncomfortable. You could be driving in, right? Imagine I'm giving a personality test and they have those questions like, I agree, most people are good at heart, or the glass is always half full, but on your way to take this test, you're involved in a hit and run. Somebody hits your car and just drove off. Well, you're probably going to answer that question based on that mood, right? So we can't control for this. So what does this mean? Every test has error. We just want to pick tests that have less error in it, or error that we can control for. We can't always control all these different things, right? You go to bed feeling completely refreshed. You got a full 8 hours of sleep. You are on top of it. You're ready to rock and roll on this test. And then you just kind of wake up with like a crick in your neck, right? Or as you're walking in, like a filling pops out, or whatever may happen. And that or you get, somebody sends you a text just as the test is about to start that says we need to talk, something like that really sets you up. You can't control for it. I kind of went over the next slides. I have a bad habit of doing this. Yep. So what's the takeaway? What is this relationship? As error increases, reliability decreases, right? Think about it as if I come to you and I say, yeah, there's some error on this test, or in this test. It means that there's some static. There's something that's keeping you from getting an accurate result. That's what we're talking about. We want accuracy. We want consistency. So think of other sources of error, right? This is important to note. Like if you go into, or if you make part of your practice, or it happens to be part of your job, testing and assessment, these are things that you're going to have to think of, right? And maybe today's not the best day to do that test on your client because they're upset, they're not themselves that day, you're not yourself that day, and so that's going to kind of influence those results. So how do we measure all this? How do we account for error in reliability. So just a reminder, I know you're probably getting tired of hearing me say it, vocabulary lessons, that's all this is. So we're going to go over a couple different ways that we measure reliability. First up is test-retest. So if I come up with an assessment for confidence or self-esteem, I give it to a group of people, it measures it, and then I can just give that test to the same group of people again sometime later. So the two questions here are, how long do I wait, right? If I wait just 5 minutes, the answers are going to be identical. If I wait 5 years, well, a lot of stuff can happen in 5 years. So we're looking at something between like 2 and 4 weeks, right? Where I would give the test the first time and then give the follow-up test later. They're identical. So how would I know if this test is reliable? If you're thinking, well, the results would be similar, that's correct, right? If I measured your confidence and your self-esteem today, and let's just say that today is June 1st, I would expect, more often than not, that's why it's a soft science, more often than not, the scores to be similar if I were to give you the test again on June 21st, 3 weeks later. There might be some slight variation, but nothing that completely derails it and is like, yeah, on the first administration, they were so confident. They were borderline narcissism now. And then the next time, everybody has cripplingly low self-esteem, right? These huge differences. It might be that you scored a 50 the first time and a 48 the second time, or 51, something like that, where it's close in administration. Like I said, I have this habit of doing it. So giving it too soon, you're just measuring the same thing in the same context. That's no good. If you wait too long, then you're measuring change over time. So imagine that I gave you the test on January 1st, right, the first of the year, your confidence. Then I give you the second administration on December 31st, right? So a full year later, I'm not really testing for reliability at this point. All I'm measuring now is how your confidence has changed over a year. Makes sense? So you can wait you can give it too soon, and you can wait too long. Parallel and alternate forms. So this might be that I have a 10-question test that measures like personality, and I give it to a group of people, and then I also give a similar and equivalent form to another group of people, right? So I think people are good most of the time. I think people are bad most of the time, right? I got to reword some of these things. So similar concept, different phrasing. Split half. If I have a 100-question counselor efficacy scale, I give half of you all the even numbers and the other half of you all the odd numbers, right? And we would hope that they would correlate, that they would be similar. Now this one is for subjective tests. So if you took the writing portion of the GRE, this is what happened. So enter score. Multiple people grade or assess the responses, right? So you write a paper about why the world needs more attention on mental health needs, and 2 people look at it, and if it was a reliable question, right, we would hope that the scorers would give similar scores. Now this is the big one. This is the one that is in every test manual, and this is what happens when you look at you want to buy a test or something like that. This is always there, and this is where they give a single number, right, between 0 and 1. They give a number that refers to how reliable it is. And what this one does is it takes all the, you give your test, I make a new confidence scale, I give it to 100 people, I take all the results, I put it in the computer, it spits out this number. It looks at how all the different questions sort of play together, how they get along, right? And you would hope that all those questions that I ask all sort of relate to the same thing. They all relate to confidence. This is important to take away. It's the only measure of reliability that requires only one administration of the test. And what this looks like, this number that we get, this is called Cronbach's alpha. It's the little fish-looking guy, right? So you get this alpha, and you'll hear it referred to as internal consistency, which is what I have it called here on this previous slide. You'll have it referred to as reliability, as alpha, as Cronbach's alpha. And so you get this number between 0 and 1. The higher, the better. The higher means there is more reliability and less error, right? So a score of 1 means it's perfectly reliable and there's absolutely no error. This is impossible, though. You can get very, very close, right? 0.96, 0.97, but you will never get to 1. And certainly you would never go over 1. Anybody that comes to you and says, I have a scale that measures depression in teens and it has a reliability of 1.2, that means there's a mistake. They're either lying to you or they made a mistake and they don't know it yet. A score of 0 means it's nothing but error, right? It's all static. This is like literally it's possible, but you'd have to like work. That would be a decision someone made to make a scale with 0. So the higher the score, the more reliable the results. And this is always included, right? And so you'll see things like, here's the Hamilton Anxiety Scale. It has an internal consistency of 0.87, right? And that's pretty good. The standard is, so highlight, star, whatever you need to do, get it tattooed. The standard is 0.7 and higher is acceptable. The higher the better, right? If it became, if it was a contest between one scale was 0.7 and the other one was 0.8, we'd want you to go with 0.8. If it was less than 0.7, then you'd have to have a pretty good rationale for why you selected it. And there can be a rationale for it. It could be that the thing you're trying to measure isn't well studied. There aren't many instruments. For example, it is notoriously difficult to accurately measure adult recollections of childhood bullying. And so there's a few surveys on bullying and assessments that we can give, but they're all below 0.7. But that's the best that there is. And if you wanted to do research or if you wanted to use that scale, that's what you're left with. And on the flip side, you can have some scales that are really, really high with their reliability. They have that 0.97. They have virtually little or no error. However, they come with a really big price tag, or there's a lot of complexity, or they're very long, or there's other drawbacks. And that's where this is a piece of what to consider. It's a really, really important piece, if not one of the most important pieces of selecting an instrument. But it is not the only one, right? So if you are in that contest between scale 1 or test 1 has a reliability of 0.97, but it costs $1,000, and here's this other one that's 0.9, and it costs $50, I think not many people would really fault you, assuming that it's measuring the same thing. There is a page in your book that compares all of this. These are the super common ones that you'll see, and you'll definitely see them when we go into the mental measurement yearbook. And I'm going to stop there for right now. Standard error of measure can get a little hairy, so why don't we stop here? I'll make a separate video for this, and we'll go over it in a live class. I hope that was helpful. Again, just look at your vocabulary, read the chapter on this. Reliability is the consistency of the scores. We need to consider reliability when selecting an instrument, and the more reliable, the better. That's going to do it for tonight. I hope everyone is well, and I will talk to you again soon.